Hey, welcome to The Goat Show, where we talk about what's got our attention today. I'm Joe, and
I am Josh. What's got our attention today are expectations and how they cloud our opinion, possibly prematurely, before we go see things. And by things, what I really mean is movies. This is something that has been biting at me for years. And really, I'm speaking specifically about movies, television, most entertainment in general, where things are reviewed on public sites. I guess that's all art, but in this case, movies. And people let those expectations effectively make up their minds before they've gone to see the product.
Right. And I understand what you're saying there, and I think this, I know for you particularly, it's a movie thing because it has a lot to do with when you go to see movies with your friends, myself included.
Yeah, and it's mostly movies just because that's the large quantity, but
right.
It also happens in music. But it's very prevalent, I find, in movies because the reviews are so accessible, and because it's something that people every week, right? There's new movies. So.
Yeah, but I also see similar things happen, music and video games, especially. Like these are other kind of
video games is probably
rich review areas
right.
for media and things like that, and where there's, I think in all of these areas, one of the things that we can see is a big build-up in anticipation, right? This doesn't happen a lot with things that kind of come out of the blue. A good example in video games was Fallout 3 when that came out. That was a big game. It was highly expected when people expected it, but their publicity cycle for that was really short. So anything they showed you in that cycle looked kind of exciting, and when you got to it, there was so much there that you hadn't unpacked. Whereas with a lot of movies these days, we're getting 2-3 trailers.
Well, I can even
teasers.
Keeping the video game movie and going back a couple years, I would use almost the second Warcraft or the third Warcraft, whatever it was, the one that took 7 years to develop and get out.
Mm-hmm.
That one, because of the delays that kept happening, there was a large marketing cycle sort of ongoing before it actually came out, and then it came out. It did well, and it was a great game. But there were some people who I think were just so hyped up and was so long that it could never live up to those expectations they had of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I know a lot of people say
even though the game was good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right.
And a lot of, I know you've got some great movie examples that you want to get to. There's a really great video game example popped into my head. It was the first Assassin's Creed. I don't know if you remember, at the time, there was a review outlet that gave it a 7 out of 10. And to them, they were like, "That's a perfectly reasonable score.
Which it is in anything.
A 70% is
that was a B in school, man. I'll take it.
Exactly. That's not a bad grade. But they essentially, there was talk about them getting blackballed by Ubisoft, and was this ethical, and not to mention the community backlash of the people who thought the game was amazing, and how could they overlook how great? And they were like, "Look, it's a great game. It has excellent graphics. It controls well." They pointed out all the benefits, but they said at the same time, basically the mission structure is very limited. It's very derivative. You're doing the same thing over and over again, and there were flaws in the game. And you can't deny that they had some problems. So I think you're going back to this, and I think this is another layer of the discussion that maybe we should get to a little further down. But it's not just about how expectations shape our opinions, right? Expectations they affect our reactions and what we can consider an acceptable reaction to it, right? So it's not just my opinion. It's not just how I feel about it, but my expectation that, we're recording this before The Last Jedi, comes out, right? Yeah. But my expectations is that's going to be a very enjoyable movie.
Right.
But just because if I expect that to be a great film, and you go to see it before I do, and you say, "Well, I didn't really like it," right. Then all of a sudden my reaction, and we can get into this as well, but it's that doubling down of no, you can't be, that can't be right, because my expectation is that's going to be a fantastic film.
Right. Ultimately these are all very personal results, right? It's in the eye of the beholder, so what I expect might not be what you expect, but there is a generality around that that encompasses whatever product we're talking about. Sticking with Star Wars, that's one I often quote, and I'll come back to the Star Wars in a second as I round that out. When you grade something, I think that it has come to be in this world now with all the aggregate scores and all the places that can give something a score. It seems like if things don't get an 8 or 9 out of 10, if they're not perfect, if they're not blockbusters, people don't give them the don't know if respect is the right word, but the awe that they deserve. As you just said, 7 out of 10 is a good score. It's a solid score. And that review basically said, look, it's got a lot of positives. It does fall short in some places, but it's still going to be enjoyable to a point. And then I think with that, you have to understand what your expectations are of that. If you go see, an indie film that, what was the one with Ben Affleck that we liked a couple months ago?
The Accountant.
You go see The Accountant. Yeah. The Accountant is not meant to be in the same genre as something like Fast and the Furious.
Right.
I wouldn't grade them similarly. I wouldn't have the same expectations going in because they're in no way, shape, or form the same type of movie.
Right, exactly.
One is supposed to be more of a thriller, suspense, and more of an artsy piece of cinema, and one's supposed to be a fast action, fun thing. One I should come out of going, that was awesome, smiling the whole way through, if I like that type of movie. And the other one is supposed to be, wow, that was very well acted, and the cinematography was good. Those are extremes, but that's basically what it has to happen. And you can't go in expecting the same thing because you're not going to get it, and that's not fair to you as the viewer, and it's not fair to the movie or to the game or whatever you're going to be reviewing too.
Yeah, and I think also, that kind of a lot of people will point to the expectation of it's got to be a 9 or higher, right? And they say, well, there's so much media out there. There's so many books to read. There's so much music to listen to. There's so many movies to see. Netflix has so much stuff in it. It's got to be great, or else I don't have time for that. And that's an opinion, a stance you can take, but I don't think that that's fair, because I think in general, you have to look at, it's not just that you got to have a 9 or higher. It's what you're going to enjoy in that genre that really appeals to you.
Right.
So for a good example being like the Marvel movies, Ant-Man is not as good as Iron Man. The first Iron Man movie, the Ant-Man movie, they're both origin stories for these characters effectively. They both introduce them to the franchise, to the cinematic universe. But they're both enjoyable films. There's nothing wrong with Ant-Man. There's one really big flaw in it, which I think if you've seen the movie, you could have done it all along, that keychain. But at the same time, you have to understand, right, that's still an enjoyable movie. And there was a great, I believe it was Glenn Weldon on Pop Culture Happy Hour, who said that he referred to a movie once as a Sunday rainy afternoon movie.
Right, which I've heard those terms before, and it's a great term.
Perfect, exactly. And you need those.
Absolutely.
You want those.
If everything's a 9, then nothing is a 9, right? If everything you see and everything you read and everything you watch is ultimate perfection, then your base then becomes that, and you're not going to enjoy anything else. We need the variance. You need the light to have the dark. It's just that age-old expression. So getting back to what we're saying with Star Wars, as you said, Star Wars, we talked about this in an earlier podcast, briefly on our Star Wars podcast. But the first 3 episodes, 1, 2, and 3, they are not as well received as 4, 5, and 6, and even 7 now, and possibly 8 coming up. They're not perfect movies. They have problems, absolutely, no doubt about it. But they are still good movies, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people went in with an unfair expectation, not false, an unfair expectation that they were going to be as good as 4, 5, and 6, and for reasons again that we discussed, but are basically, the cloud that surrounds 4, 5, and 6, especially for people of a certain age group, a wide age group, that they were just so good and they hit you as a kid and you have such fond memories and they hit you in a place in your heart. You can't reproduce that. Doesn't matter how good they're going to be. So you go in, people were expecting that. That's not fair. So A, it's never going to hit those, number one.
No, never.
B, if you read the reviews for some of them, you don't like Jar Jar. So now, if you're looking for Jar Jar Binks to be annoying, pissy, upset, racist, a whole bunch of things that he is.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for it because you read it and you're like, oh, I know this part's going to be bad. Here comes the bad part. And he comes and sure enough, it's going to deliver.
Yeah.
That's all you're focusing on. That's all you're going to remember.
Yeah.
You're not going to remember some of the good stuff, all the other good things that it does. If you're looking for the poorly written dialogue that George Lucas is very adept at doing, unfortunately, when it comes out, that's all you're going to be focused on.
Yeah. Conversely,
if you read that and say, okay, there's probably some bad dialogue, but there's probably also some good action shots, and it moves the story on really well, and Liam Neeson is great, and Ewan McGregor is great, right? And you just wait for those things to happen, Then when the movie's done, you can say, hey, you know what? They were right about the dialogue, and they were right about Jar Jar, but they were also right about Qui-Gon. They were also right about young Obi-Wan. Those guys were great. I enjoyed those parts very much. So yeah, I'd probably give it, if you ask me what I was going to say about it, it wasn't as good as 4, 5, and 6, but I enjoyed lots of parts of it.
Right.
And if somebody gives it a 6.5 or a 7, that's a movie I think was worth seeing. If you said to me, here's a 7 out of 10 movie, or even a 6.5, I'd say, okay, well, I should probably see that.
Yeah.
Especially if it's from a franchise that I already like. But there's tons of people out there who just ripped it apart. This was awful, and this was awful, and Jar Jar is awful, and there's too much digital effects, and all the things that are true about the cons of the movie. Then I asked them how they feel about it, and I don't know, maybe a C minus, a C plus, a B, even just a regular C. Like, okay, well, that's not an awful movie. I mean, to me, an awful movie is 5, 4, D. Those grades that make it effectively a fail. That's a bad movie. That's one you're going to want to stay away from. Another one that's similar, that was more recent, Superman versus Batman. It had problems. I did not. This was not a great movie.
Martha.
Yeah, it really. There are a couple key places where it falls apart, and it's a shame because I feel it really just needed a couple of rewrites and it'd be great, but it didn't. Fine. Mm-hmm. Was it still a bad movie? Was it as bad as people make it out to be? Even the first Superman, the Man of Steel, was it as bad as people? There's some parts people didn't like when Superman snapped Zod's neck because he was killing. They didn't like a couple other things. Those things don't make it an awful movie, But when I had numerous friends who read that. They read the reviews, or they see a review on Rotten Tomatoes and it says 66%, and they don't even know how Rotten Tomatoes works in terms of its aggregation. They go in, they see the bad parts that were specifically written about in the review. They come out saying, "Well, that was awful. It was I didn't like it at all." And then all they can harp on is those key points that were discussed that were already presented to them. They made up their mind before they're going in.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't like either of those movies as much as you, and part of that is I'm more of a Marvel guy than a DC guy, and there's a whole bunch of other factors. But I do think, like Superman v Batman, Dawn of Justice had it was unfortunate because I feel like, and I'm going to say this is a general superhero film thing. Almost all of the superhero films fall apart in the third act because they have to have these giant set piece knockdown drag out fights. And a lot of the time, it's really hard to make that really good. The first Iron Man film is really great. It still stands up very well. I watched it long ago. But when you get to that final fight with the Ironmonger, it's really not. It doesn't stand up to. You just want to watch Robert Downey Jr. walk around and be Tony Stark for another 20 minutes and end the film. I felt like Dawn of Justice. I really like Ben Affleck as Batman.
Me too.
He was. I thought he played a really great. Dark, tortured, being around
Batman,
yeah, exactly, and kind of the elder statesman Batman, which I think sets up very well for the Justice League and this idea of him. There's there are a lot of different takes on that character and his relationship to the League, and him as kind of a reluctant founder or member, or not even refusing to be a member, but being like a kind of consult on frequent occasions, but the idea to say, here's a guy who's seen some things, who's being pushed to his limits, beyond his limits, to his breaking point effectively, and then because of that, he's going to realize the need to find other people who can assist him, to who he can essentially groom or coach or prepare to be that next wave of protection. And
I think, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think because it's important for the Batman part, to that effect, given our topic, I think people were expecting Chris Nolan's Batman. They were expecting still the Batman of what effectively might be 10, 15 years younger, who doesn't use guns, and who is much more, I don't know what the word would be, but
cavalier.
Cavalier is probably a very good word. That still is going to do a lot of good in the world. He's going to fix things that are wrong everywhere. And that's not what this Batman was.
No.
And they make no apologies for that. And nor is he supposed to be. As you just said, he's supposed to be a little older guy who's been beaten and downtrodden and is now maybe a little rejuvenated by the possibility of what could happen.
Yeah.
But he has changed his ways, and that happens in the comic books. But a lot of people either don't know that or weren't expecting that or didn't like that.
Yeah.
And therefore, they didn't like him, which is not fair.
Yeah.
I don't think.
I saw this as if you go back to Batman Beyond, this is an older...
Batman Beyond the cartoon?
Yeah, the cartoon. Yeah. So, obviously it's not contemporary look at Batman, but in one of the things that did really well in the very first episode of that cartoon, they had to explain why Batman wasn't Batman anymore. And they set up a scenario where he's beating up guys in a warehouse, and he has a heart attack. And his heart gives out to such an extent that he's about to die, he's going to get shot, and he grabs a gun. And he's able to hold the guy off with a gun and get out of there. And then he hangs it up not just because he used a gun, but because he realized at that moment he was ready to use the gun. He was ready to execute, to pull the trigger to save himself because he had to, because that was where he was at, and he wasn't going to put himself in that situation again. So that is a Batman, an iteration of the Batman character that's always sat at the back of my psyche.
Right.
So when I saw Dawn of Justice and the idea of him using guns, I'm like, okay, but this is a guy who's using them as a tool. He's not using them to execute people. And this is a Batman who's somewhere between that Chris Nolan swagger and confident Batman, the one who's got all of it wrapped up, and the Batman of Batman Beyond, who has all the knowledge, all the skills, but ultimately is just not the younger man he used to be.
Right, he just can't do it anymore, so he's got to apply different rules.
Exactly. So I think this exchange, what this goes to say is that portion of that film was clearly, we thought it was pretty darn good. And I think there were a lot of people you could talk to who would say they liked that part of the film. But at the same time, there's a lot of expectations weighing against it, both from kind of negative reviews. Also, let's face it, Ben Affleck is a divisive actor too.
Absolutely. And it's a divisive role.
Yeah. And so we happen to like him as an actor, and we've seen him in a number of things. Yeah. But some people really, the moment that they announced Ben Affleck's going to be Batman, people thought, oh great, like here's a role for him to ruin.
But to those people, if those people are seeing the movie, that's not a matter of expectation now. If you've chosen to see a movie with an actor that you don't like,
right,
you're obviously not going to like it.
Yeah.
That's another step forward in this conversation. That look, if I'm going to go take a class in university that I don't like, I'm not going to like it, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's going to say to you, why would you take a class in, mathematics if you don't like math? Yeah. You're not going to do well, you're not going to like it. So if you don't like Ben Affleck, as an example, but still chose to see Superman versus Batman and Dawn of Justice, well, I know you're not going to like it.
Yeah.
But at least, hopefully, you have the ability to say to yourself, look, everything else these parts were great. Obviously, I didn't like Ben Affleck because I don't like Ben Affleck. But, the story was good, or the effects were good, or, I did like what he did with the character. I just really don't like him. And I think we all have those actors. That,
absolutely.
I can hear the other side of this argument. I have a friend, a very close friend of mine. Yes, Adam, I'm talking about you. And I can hear him in my head saying, okay, so they changed that Batman to be a different Batman we just discussed, but why would they do that? If the majority of the people out there want that other Batman that doesn't use guns and that is much more cavalier and is more confident and isn't that downtrodden and beaten and hasn't changed, why wouldn't you give us that one then? That's the one that we want. Give the people what they want. And there's validity to that. The answer is that I can't answer that. The only people that can answer that are the director and the writer, excuse me, and the producers, and because they chose to. So you now, as the moviegoer, have to make a decision. Do you accept that or not? Accept it or not, but don't make up your mind about it before going in. That's all I'm trying to say, right? Yeah. So you've seen the preview. You've watched the preview. Did Batman just have a gun on the Batmobile? Well, I don't like that. Why would he do that? Okay, it's a valid question, but don't think it's now. So that's crap. Give it a chance to explain itself before you make up your mind. You can still think it's crap at the end of the day. You can still not like it, but don't premeditate that thought. Make up your own mind once you have all the answers in front of you.
Right, and I think that, ultimately, also there's a vote with your dollars here too, right? Like the idea that just because they're going to present you with a Batman movie, a movie with Batman in it, doesn't mean you have to go see it. You know, just because I like superhero films or I like superheroes, if I see let's say that I see him I see there's a gun on the Batmobile, I don't like that idea. Or the Justice League previews come out and I see that they're kind of going that route of like Batman's got a whole bunch of different types of vehicles, and I don't like that style of Batman. Batman should have a Batmobile and a bike and that's it, or whatever. Fine. If that's my choice, if my expectation is so fixed that I have to have a certain Batman, a certain type of character in mind, or a certain type of film, right? Going back to genre, you were talking about a thriller or an action film or whatever it is, if I have to have that and I don't see it, like there's ample opportunity these days to get an idea if you're going to like that thing before you go. And if you don't like it, you can always just abstain. You can always say, I really like the Jack Reacher films. I know a lot of the people who love the books didn't like them. They didn't feel that it was true to the books. They didn't like the way that the character is manifesting or whatever, and that's fine. I've never read a Jack Reacher novel. I don't have a burning desire to do so. I like those films. I think they're great Sunday afternoon. What was it? Sunday rainy afternoon movies. I think that they're decently acted. I think they've got a pretty decent plot. They're enjoyable. You don't have to think too hard, but they've got a little mystery. But if I went to that film and I expected, expected like a Jason Bourne, movie, and this is setting up a franchise with Treadstone and layers of government conspiracy, or I'm going to it and I am expecting Transformers, Michael Bay explosions and guns, I'm going to be disappointed in either case. And so the question then has to come to you. Well, when you see that preview, particularly the first one's very clear. There's a guy who kills a person or is accused of killing someone, and he requests Jack Reacher to defend him because he knows that Jack Reacher hates him and will make sure he gets a fair defense. That sets up a very clear style of movie, which should set your expectations. And then based on those expectations, you can act, but don't sit there and go, well, that's clearly not as good as a Bourne film, and then go to the movie and complain about how it's not as good as a Bourne film, because it's not a Bourne film.
And I think Bourne is a great example with the fourth one that just came out. The first three Bourne films were very true to their nature, both in their plot and their acting, in the action sequences, although the second one, the action sequences were a little too choppy for me. But the fourth one came out, and I found it failed on a lot of the pillars that it set up in the first three.
Right.
Now I saw the previews, and it looked, I was very excited. It looks just like the first three. This is going to be great. And love Matt Damon, and he's great in that role. And then that movie was just not good. It had lots of very specific things, and the realism that they set up in that world didn't continue into this one. It wasn't a good movie. Right. And it didn't live up to the expectations. I didn't make up my mind, and in one way, I actually was the opposite. I had made up my mind. Oh, this is going to be great. I expected it to be a great Bourne film, and it was not a great Bourne film. And I think because of that, I was let down even more.
Right. Well, and I think it's interesting. This kind of ties into something that I was thinking about when we were just kind of discussing this topic. I'm a big fan of Shut Up and Sit Down. They're a website. They review board games. Check them out if you haven't already. And recently, as at the time of this recording, they kind of just recently released their review of Pandemic Legacy Season 2. They talk about it on their recent podcast as well. So I consume both of those media. I guess there'd be spoilers for that review. Their review is spoiler free. I'm not going to spoil a board game at all. But if you care about their review that badly, pause this podcast and go watch their review for 15 minutes and then come back. But on the podcast, when dealing with that review, the nutcase of that review is Quinn's, the reviewer, gave Pandemic Legacy Season 1 his Game of the Year 2015, arguably one of the best games he has ever played. It has been lauded by many outlets, including Board Game Geek, very, very highly rated. Season 2 comes out, he does the review, and punchline, he says, I don't really like it. I don't think it stands up to the first one, and he has some really great reasons for that. But in the podcast, he talked about, when they were kind of fronting that segment of the podcast, he described his own expectations, right? I expected to love this game because I loved the first one so much.
Which is very valid.
Absolutely. And he talked about other outlets who loved the first one and loved the second one equally. They see this. But when he explains, at least to my ears, to my mind, and having not consumed all the media about that game, but when he describes the flaws he sees with that game, they sound very reasonable and very objective. And I feel like that was an instance of someone who came in and said, look, I have these expectations. My expectations are there. They're very real. But I'm going to check them at the door and try to judge this thing based on the merits of what it is. So, he looked at it and he was like, well, what is the core game? What are you starting with? As you progress through the game, how does it feel compared to the first one? He can still compare it. You can look at the first one and say, my expectations were this because of this original thing. But at the same time, he can also make an objective comparison and say, in the first one, while there were problems with the story told itself in this way, which really connected with us. In the second one, the story tells itself in a different way. And as a result, I don't feel connected. I'm forced to imagine different things that are not as tangible. And I think that's a really, to me, that's one of the reasons that I advocate their website. If somebody's talking about board games, I have a few friends who are very, we play board games with them on occasion. And they're very avid consumers. And to me, I always say, my book of record is shut up and sit down, because I know that those guys, they'll sit down and they'll look at that game. And it doesn't matter if they've been reading press for a year and a half about it, that they've done, seen playtests and stuff. They try their very, very best to judge a game based on what it is, when it's released, and what their experience is.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think stepping back even one step farther into that puzzle is, if you're going to be somebody who takes into account reviews on anything, you have to do a bit of diligence to understand where that review is coming from. Right? There's so many review sites now. When we were growing up, when I was young, going back to movies, for instance, the only real reviews you had were, Siskel and Ebert, who happened to have a TV show, maybe Entertainment Tonight, and Leonard Maltin, who had a book, if you want to read his book, and then maybe your local newspaper,
right?
And that was it.
Radio station, maybe.
Right, exactly. You had to still, even with that small group, you had to realize, every time this newspaper reviews something, I always disagree with it. I don't like that person, so stop listening to that person, because obviously you're not on the same wavelength. Conversely, I watch Siskel and Ebert, his reviews seem to be dead on with what I like, so I'm really going to focus on what he says and take those into account before I make a decision, because he seems to see things the same way I do. And nowadays, you can turn a page and you can go on the internet and find 1,000 different places that review on movies, TVs, board games, books, whatever. Just because somebody's sitting behind a desk typing a review doesn't mean they're a quality reviewer. The review process is one of those unique mixtures in life that's a mix of science and art and opinion. You'd like to make sure that the person is doing the reviewing is doing as being subjective as possible. They're sitting down, as you just said, and saying, okay, this is a television. I'm going to write a review about this TV. So they're going to review it based on where the movies, how it does in gaming, how it does reflective of the light, how it does in viewing angles, and they're going to show you that. They're going to be subjective as possible. Not just I looked at it, and this TV when I was watching The Matrix was better than this one. That was it. Well, that's a pretty lame review.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't trust that person.
No.
When you look at a site like The Wirecutter,
I was just going
to
say, yeah,
has a big section on there of why you should trust us, and that's such an important section. Eventually, you need to, I've stopped reading it because I already trust them now. But they made such a good point about understanding, who the person is reviewing it, why you should trust them, why you should trust us, how we set up the system, how we basically go through a scientific method to set up the review, and then also how the review comes out. Look, this one's great. They might say, right, this TV's better, but it's not $3,000 better.
Right.
It's just not. If you want that, go for it. If you want the ultimate best, this is the one to get, go ahead. But for most of you out there, we think this is the best one. And it's the exact same thing with movies or TV, right? And that harkens back to what we were saying before about the types of movies. Mm-hmm. I using Fast and the Furious as an example we did before, I don't like those types of movies. I never really have. So I see a review for or I see an ad for Fast and the Furious. I really like the actors. I love The Rock. Jason Statham, when he's in the right role, is great. But I know I'm not going to like that movie. It doesn't matter how well it's reviewed. It doesn't matter how many billions of dollars it does. How many people see it. I don't like that explosion just for fun stuff. I think you can get that with still a higher quality movie, in my opinion, because I can't stand some of the lack of realism in it. The Rock punching a missile and changing its trajectory. Some people think that's awesome, cool. I think that's absurd. That's fine. But I know that going in. I don't need to see the movie to know that, because I understand the type of movie that I'm reviewing. So it's so important in that sense. And then conversely, well, actually on the same level, something like Underworld, right? Which has how many? There's like at 6 of them.
At least 4 of them.
It gets very good reviews, and then people keep going to see them, or that got good reviews. The first couple ones, I did not like them. I didn't like them from day one. I didn't like the first one. We went to see it together with some other friends. The theater was packed. I remember. Yeah. Everybody loved it. You guys all raved about it afterwards.
Whoa.
Well, you liked it.
I enjoyed it
okay.
Based on what I felt were its merits. But
right.
You're right. I feel like, go on. Sorry, go on. Defend myself.
So I did not like it. Fine. And that's what it is. What it is. Fine. Second one came out, and everybody was hyped to go see it. And I said, look, I really didn't like the first one, and this one's getting the same reviews, but I'll give it a fair shake. And I went to see it, and it was worse than the first, in my opinion. By the third one came around, I did not go to see that. And I think in another very, very polarizing example is Transformers. Right? The Transformers movies came out. The first one came out. You and I are Transformers kids. We love them. We were so excited to see it because it's Transformers. Mm-hmm. And that first movie, even though it was Michael Bay, who we're not very fond of, that movie came out. The reviews were kind of mixed. We went to see it, and our opinion was kind of mixed. It was okay, but goddamn, when they transformed, it was awesome. I remember thinking there's some part in that movie like, ugh, that didn't make sense, or that's an awful dialogue line, and this is, oh my god, that was so cool. Like, that was just awesome. Fine. So, it was a typical Michael Bay movie, but it was Transformers, so we liked it. We made up our mind after we saw it. Second one comes out, and you and I see the reviews. I remember watching when they were watching TV, and the review comes on, and we both sort of had the same reaction, which was, I don't know. I mean, I really want to like it, but that preview does not look good. But we didn't we gave it a chance. We didn't make up our minds then to not see it. We tried to go in very subjectively, saying it's not going to be crap. Halfway through the movie, in the theater, we realized steaming pile of crap. We did not like. I mean, I think you and I were laughing at it at one point. It was so absurdly bad.
It was pretty atrocious.
But we did that after seeing the movie. Right. That's the important part. We toughed it out, so to speak. And that's, I think, the way to do it. You either, as you said before, you have to make up your mind to not see it because you already know you're not going to like it. Like, no, Transformers 3, 4, and 5?
Yeah, I think they're up to 5 now.
I didn't see them at all because I know I will not like them. I'm not even going to bother. I've had the chance to watch them on demand. No, I'm not going to bother because it's just going to be disappointing to myself. So you either do that, or you have to understand, okay, I've got this review, I've seen that preview, I have this friend, I have all this information, some of it good, some of it bad, but I'm now going to put that aside for a moment, not think about it, and go watch the movie, or go watch the TV show, or go play the board game, then make up my own mind, use your own brain, rather than say, I have all this information, well, everybody's telling me it's going to be bad, so I'm going to go see it, and it's going to be bad. Well, of course it's going to be bad. You're waiting for it to be bad. If you're looking for bad, you're going to get bad. If you're looking for good, you're going to get good. People don't do that enough, and it drives me crazy. And I think it has hurt some movies and some franchises, and it has benefited other ones when they didn't like it. I think it's affected all of them in equally as frustrating manner, so to speak.
I think so one kind of example that I think would be great to kind of put towards the end of this. So we recently we tried a whiskey that historically it comes from a distillery that we haven't really liked all their products, and we tried 1 or 2 of them, and we have friends who really enjoy it, but everyone's palate is different.
I would say historically we've hated it.
Well, you.
I
You've
specifically
hated
have not hated it.
I
have very much hated it.
Yeah,
So
I wouldn't say my hate doesn't run as deep.
mine does. I would.
Yeah.
Like avoid it.
Yeah. You're emperor level hate.
Yeah,
I get that.
It's just awful. Why? I don't know why somebody would drink it. That's how I feel about it.
But everybody's tongue is built differently and everything.
Right.
But so we procured some whiskey from this distillery. It was a new variety that we hadn't tried, and we thought, you know what, we'll give it a try, see what it's like. Poured a small quantity for each. And we both really enjoy it.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Surprisingly enjoyed it.
Yeah. So I mean, it goes to show that as far as your expectations go, there are lots of different ways to form educated expectations. There are lots of ways that you can act on those expectations. But I think what's important is that to kind of understand where you stand on those things, and to be able to for better or for worse, sometimes set those aside to form independent opinions and educated opinions.
Just make up your own mind.
Yeah.
After the experiment has happened. Yeah. That's all I ask.
Yeah.
That's all we ask. That's all that's got my attention. Stop making up your mind before you do whatever you're going to do. Have an open mind. Try stuff. Don't be afraid. And just let it happen. And then you can be upset or happy with whatever you're doing.
And we want to know, how do you formulate your expectations? Do you find that your expectations affect what you go to see, read, watch, listen to? Let us know. Reach out to us. Continue this conversation on Twitter, Instagram @GetOurAttention. Feel free to follow us. We've got lots of stuff that we'll be talking about there. So we're eager to hear what you guys have to say.
You can always also reach us on our website at thegoatshow.ca. Email us there or just leave a comment for this actual episode. Stick around for our next show. We'll talk to you soon.